Most people have no idea what is about to happen. However, the data shows that we are already at a point of historical rupture. There is one detail that almost no one notices, but it could completely change the way you think about the economic future. Based on economic cycles, historical data, and concrete signals, this video provides a rational and practical reading of what is to come. Just before we begin, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel to help me improve the channel's content. Throughout history, all great empires have followed a surprisingly similar pattern. Each of them has experienced a predictable cycle of rise and decline. It seems fictional, but empires follow an almost foreseeable script, as if history is stuck in a loop. This cycle begins with consistent internal growth. Then comes the phase of projecting power. The empire expands its influence through strategic alliances, military dominance, and control of economic routes. But inevitably, over time, excesses emerge. Uncontrolled public spending, rising debt, and external conflicts accumulate. The next phase is the quietest, the loss of confidence. When other powers cease to use the empire's currency for reserves and trade, this indicates something greater. Hegemony begins to crumble from within before an external enemy even has the chance to threaten it. Today, the United States maintains the largest military budget in the world and still controls key institutions of the global financial system. But at the same time, it faces a public debt that exceeds 34 trillion euro, record fiscal deficits, and a dollar that is increasingly questioned as an international reserve. Are we witnessing, the repetition of a cycle we have seen before? The answer may be closer than it seems. The story shows that these empires do not fall overnight. They crumble gradually, sustained by a collective denial that contaminates elites, governments, and institutions. This psychological pattern is recurrent. When the first signs of decline appear, the most common reaction is not adjustment, but mental blockage. Why do experienced leaders insist on denying what is before their eyes? This phenomenon has a name: psychology of denial. It is the mechanism by which a society, confronted with uncomfortable evidence, chooses not to see, not due to a lack of intelligence, but out of fear of the consequences. There is also the so-called Cassandra effect. Individuals who, based on data, warn about systemic risks, yet are discredited for not saying what the public wants to hear. Before the crisis of 2008, some economists warned about the collapse of the American market. They were right, but were ridiculed. Why does this happen repeatedly? It is not the lack of warning that destroys empires. It is the refusal to confront what lies before them. And when they finally see, it is often too late. But does the outcome have to be the same this time? Since the late 1970s, something has silently changed at the core of advanced economies. For more than a century, inflation-adjusted purchasing power grew steadily. Workers received more, and this more actually bought more. But this virtuous cycle has been interrupted. Nominal wages continue to rise. However, prices for housing, education, health, and energy increased even faster. The result? A worker in 2025 earns more euro than 30 years ago, but buys less with it. This has been masked by a tool: credit. With the stagnation of real wages, the solution offered to the average citizen was simple yet misleading. Instead of improving their income, debt was offered. Credit cards, long mortgages, student loans, all were made easier. The illusion of prosperity was maintained, not through gains, but through the anticipation of consumption. But how long can this illusion sustain itself? Let's translate this into practical numbers. Imagine a family with a monthly income of 4,000 euro. If this income loses 1% of purchasing power per year for 3 decades, which is quite generous compared to real inflation averages, by the end of this period, the cumulative loss exceeds 26%. This is equivalent to living on 3,000 euro. It's like losing a quarter of the budget without ever receiving a formal warning. This is the true trap. There is no abrupt fall, only a continuous slide. And precisely because it is gradual, few notice. But the impact, after years or decades, is devastating. And the most unsettling question remains: did everyone suffer equally? Between 1980 and 2020, the richest 1% of the population in the United States controlled about 25% of the national wealth at the beginning of the 80s, and today they hold over 40%. This leap was not a statistical coincidence. How was this possible in such a short time? The answer begins with the divergence between productivity and remuneration. Over the last 4 decades, workers have produced more per hour, with more technology and fewer errors. However, the average remuneration for this work has stagnated. Where exactly has this capital gone? While the majority of the population has accumulated liabilities, mortgages, student debts, and personal loans, the wealthiest 1% has concentrated on assets, shares, funds, profitable properties, private equity, and wealth protection structures. Each crisis, each interest rate cut, each new monetary stimulus has, in practice, served to inflate the prices of these assets, and those who already owned them became even more distant from the base of the pyramid. And what is even more concerning, this trend not only continues, it is accelerating. The question is how to position oneself in the face of this. Inflation has become a structural component of developed economies. Basic food items, energy, and essential services have experienced consistent increases, even after the pandemic peaks. This is no longer a temporary supply effect, but a new reality of prices driven by enduring factors. But what does this mean for the average investor? To contain this advance, central banks have resorted to the classic weapon, raising interest rates. The theory is simple: make credit more expensive, slow down the economy, and cool prices. However, there is an inevitable side effect. The higher the rate, the more expensive it becomes to roll over public debts. In countries like the United States, where federal debt has already surpassed €34 trillion, this translates to an unsustainable burden. In 2023, the United States spent more on debt interest than on the entire military budget. And this is in a country whose defense machine consumes hundreds of billions of euro each year. If interest rates remain high, how can social programs, infrastructure investments, or future stimulus measures be maintained? The answer is uncomfortable. Perhaps they will not be maintained. This scenario puts governments in a tight spot. Cutting expenses jeopardizes growth. Raising taxes generates social tension, and printing money reignites inflation. What will be the exit strategy? When debt servicing consumes a large portion of the budget, the system ceases to be sustainable. It is precisely at this point that historical ruptures tend to occur. Being aware of this is not pessimism, it is strategic survival. But there is an external factor that may further accelerate this process, and it is growing far away from Washington. While the West grapples with stagnation and rising debt, China has charted a different path. Over the past 3 decades, its GDP has grown, on average between 6 and 9% per annum, a pace that has transformed the country from a rural economy into a global, technological, and industrial hub. But what does this have to do with its financial reserves? Behind the scenes of global trade, something even more significant is occurring. China has been forging bilateral agreements with dozens of countries for transactions without the use of the dollar. Brazil, India, Russia, Iran all have begun trading in local currencies. This movement is not merely symbolic. It directly undermines the primary geopolitical advantage of the United States, the global demand for its currency. The dollar has always been more than just a medium of exchange. It has been the anchor of a system. But when the anchor begins to rust, the ship loses stability. Between 2023, the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen from 70% to 58%, a decline of 12 percentage points in just over 2 decades. Does that number seem small? Think about what it represents. Hundreds of billions of dollars quietly migrating to other currencies and assets. So, what to do when even traditional assets become vulnerable? In light of an unstable global scenario, protecting assets is no longer a preference, it is an obligation. It is not about predicting the future with precision, but about structuring a portfolio capable of withstanding the shocks that are already underway. The good news, the practical part starts now. And yes, there are only 5 steps, but each can make an enormous difference if applied. The first step is to expose a portion of the capital to real and non-inflationary assets. Gold, silver, and some other commodities tend to preserve value when currency loses strength. You may keep between 10% and 25% of the portfolio in these assets, especially during cycles of monetary uncertainty. Next, it is essential to reduce exposure to variable rate debts. If you have contracts indexed to fluctuating interest rates, now is the time to review them. Prioritize the repayment of the more expensive debts or those vulnerable to increases. Why? Because refinancing in a tightening monetary cycle may not be possible. Many families discover this when it is already too late. The third point is international diversification. Global ETFs, multi-asset funds, and shares in companies operating in different currencies help to reduce local risk. When the center of the system begins to weaken, the investor's logic changes. It is no longer about maximum return, but about maximum protection. And protection begins with where you anchor your liquidity. The fourth strategy is to generate passive income with security. Invest in companies with solid cash flow, a history of dividends, and defensive sectors such as infrastructure or health. Aim for yields above inflation and with a healthy payout. It is not just about how much is paid, but with what stability it is paid. Finally, maintain a strategic liquidity reserve, 6 to 12 months of expenses in cash or liquid assets. This reserve serves both defensively and offensively. It keeps you safe against unforeseen events, but it also serves to seize opportunities when the market becomes disorganized. And when that happens, as it did in 2000, 2008, and 2020, only those with cash decide. The rest merely reacts. Crises do not knock on the door. They form gradually, and when they collapse, they do so suddenly. Like this video to receive more content that will help you prepare for crises, and share this video with those who are not yet preparing. We will see you in the next video.